we are happy to be
This
joined.
meeting is being recorded.
We are happy to be joined by three sets of authors. The topics, admittedly, are quite varied and very interesting. I think that the location of the authors is also varied. So some are in the U.S., others are in Europe, and some are in the Philippines. So there will be three papers. One is by Mitch Abdon and Tanya Flint on transformers against SMS spam. The presentation will be followed by Vince Yao on digital for her forecasting platform work for women in rural Philippines, which I think is very interesting. And the third paper is joint work by Gabby Domingo and Dash Cordera from the Philippine Competition Commission on market power in Philippine agriculture using production function approach. So we'll ask the presenters to uh, show their work, and then we will end with the Q&A for all the three papers. So shall we start with Mitch and Tanya, please? Thank you.
Uh, thank you. I'll share my screen now. Oops. Um, Hindi pwedeng mag-share. Naka-disable yung screen sharing. Screen sharing is disabled. Can you enable screen sharing? Thank you.
Can the PS admin help us, please?
Can you see the screen now?
Yes, it's good. Go ahead, Mitch.
So thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Mitch. I'm presenting with Tanya Flint. We are both in the Masters of Information and Data Science program at the UC Berkeley School of Information. And we will be presenting the paper that we did in August for our natural language programming processing class on SMS filtering using transformer deep learning architecture. So this is motivated by the smishing attacks in the Philippines. Okay, sorry. Next slide. First, we briefly discuss the motivation of the study and compare email and SMS structures and business models. And then we will present the data and models that we use. And then finally, we will discuss the results and offer some takeaways. These are news headlines in 2021. So more than just annoying, SMS spams are a threat to data privacy, financial stability, and also national security. And the rants and anger among citizens have led to investigation and calls for networks to end spam text messages. So fast forward to now, 2022, we still receive SMS spams, and it's still part of our daily lives, and even gets scarier with personalized messages. The spam messages is addressing us in our complete names. So in around September this year, NTC ordered telcos to block suspect sites in September, and Globe subsequently blocked all messages with website links. Still, here we are. This is a screenshot of my SMS app taken yesterday. So except for my mother and BPI's messages, all of these are like spam messages. So SMS messaging or texting remains an important medium for communication, especially in the Philippines or in other developing countries. texting via mobile networks is still widely used due to the limited coverage of broadband services that make internet-based messaging apps like WhatsApp, Viber, Telegram inaccessible or more expensive for others. In the Philippines, 73% still prefer to use SMS despite the declining trend in the rest of Southeast Asia. Moreover, market studies find SMS more engaging. Consumers are more likely to open, read, and react to SMS than emails. This makes SMS a better marketing platform. So, effective filtering of SMS messages could have a wider social impact by minimizing smishing attacks before they could reach and be read by potential victims. But why has there been not much action against SMS spam compared to email spam? Are models adequate to accurately classify SMS spam messages? And if yes, why do we still receive a lot of SMS spam? So, on the first question, why has there been not much action against SMS spam? Their service providers operate. So on structure, messages are short, while emails can be anywhere from one word hello to an essay long letter. And also, text messages are generally informal and conversational. So the former limits the context that can be embedded in the model, and the latter further abstracts the language for machines, for instance, from the use of slangs, idioms, and local dialects. On the business model, the email service market is essentially a global duopoly, with Google or Gmail and Microsoft Outlook accounting for 60% of market share email hostings. On the contrary, SMS is provided by country-based telecommunication networks. Because the main business of email service providers is hosting, there is a strong incentive to invest in research and infrastructure to develop sophisticated filtering of unwanted and potentially harmful emails for their clients. Google, for example, reportedly detects and filters 99.9% of spam and phishing emails. Can this level of accuracy be achieved for SMS spam as well? So maybe, but this is unlikely to be provided by mobile service providers on their own, as they profit from aggregators sending messages in bulk, whether spam or ham. So what data did we use? We used the benchmark dataset from UCI machine learning repository, and this data comprises 747 spam and 4,827 ham text messages collected from various sources. So one challenge with this data is that this is not specific to the Philippines, to which we intend to apply the results, and that the messages in it are over a decade old. So as mentioned earlier, text messaging is generally informal and could include local specific languages in idioms and slangs. Thus, the model must be trained in this as well to provide local context. So to address this lack of country-specific data, we crowdsource spam messages via Google Form to augment the training set with local samples. So after the duplication, we collected 533 spam messages from the Philippines in June 22. We have a total of 6,100 samples of and 1,880 spats, and 4,827 hams split into 4,885 training sets and 1,122 test sets. So this expanded data brings the spam ham ratio to 21 and 79%. This is an improvement from the 13 to 87%, but still imbalance. So in one of our experiments, we tried to account for data imbalance to see whether this affects classification performance. Um, okay. So another limitation is that we have only crowdsourced for spam messages and would have to rely entirely on the UCI data for ham data, which are in English and collected over a decade ago, as I mentioned earlier. So while this may be problematic, the structure of actual conversations may have mostly stayed the same. And moreover, the, in, the influence of Americans in Filipino culture and language from their 48-year occupation lingers through today. So, for example, only a fifth of the messages in the Philippines is Filipino, based when we check this using Google Translate detection algorithm. Nevertheless, some Filipino text some Filipino text adds to mod to the complexity of the modeling. And to mitigate this issue and see if this makes a difference, we implemented our models on auto-translated spam text into English using Google Translate. So we also note the potential bias introduced into the data from the way it was collected. So the additional spam that were collected via Google Forms crowdsourcing was sent to personal networks and was reshared to their networks there in Manila. So each respondent may have sent or submitted multiple submissions, and each form may contain up to like 5 spam messages that are self-reported by the recipient. Thus, it is dependent on what the respondent consider as spam. So here are a couple of examples of messages. So one glaring difference is the means to which the recipient would respond. Um, so, so we so we observe that spam messages from UCI and the Philippines both attempt to lure recipients into responding in return for some reward, and that the difference is that UCI spams encourage recipient to call, while Philippine spam, because it's newer, encourages to click. So this reflects the changing preferences over time, because as mentioned earlier, the UCI data was like 10 years older. Ham messages, on the other hand, are conversational as expected. We also observed some auto translation limitations where the input words are heavily truncated. So next, Tanya will explain the models we have implemented on this data and the result.
Thank you, Mitch. Yes, I'm going to go over some of the choices of the neural network architecture we did for this work. First, we knew that we want to focus on deep learning models and have quite complex models with a couple layers within the neural network. So our initial approach, the reason we took this approach was because neural networks are usually good at detecting patterns. And we think this type of problem is pattern recognition problem. We know from previous work that spam detection has relied heavily on understanding which parts of the text are indicative of whether it's spam or not. And we previous models were based on, so you could base a model just on that specific part of text and get a pretty accurate result whether this is a spam or not spam. So we're using neural networks to understand those patterns. The two big architectures for us were based on convolutional neural networks. And what convolutional neural networks do is look at the window at a time. So that means a couple words at a time. And when we started this work, we theorized that convolutional neural networks should perform the best on this type of problem because they will be better at recognizing which exact words could be indicative whether this is spam or not. We wanted to also compare two different types of embeddings. For example, The first CNN, the first convolutional neural network, was based on a word-to-vec embedding. This is a technique that transfers the text or translates the text into a numeric representation of the text, because the models we cannot feed just raw text into the models. We need some kind of numeric representation. We use techniques that we've been introduced in the past. So word-to-vec is one of them. The issue with word-to-vec, it produces a static embedding, meaning that words that are spelled the same but have two different meanings will be represented the same. Where BERT is a type of neural network. So it's part of our neural network architecture, but it also has a way of producing those embeddings. The difference with BERT is that BERT would produce an embedding that takes into the consideration the context in which each word is used. So BERT nowadays is mostly outperforms older word-to-vec models. We also looked into LSTMs. LSTMs, we know from previous work, have worked well for this type of problem. I think when we looked at previous research, LSTM reached the highest accuracy, or F1 score. I think it was accuracy on this type of problem. So we wanted to include it on and run it on our unique data set, the data set that we've collected ourselves with a subset of existing UCI data, and kind of compare how our LSTM will compare to LSTM, the architecture done in the past. And lastly, we also wanted to compare the BERT with convolutional neural networks with just base BERT. Like, what if we took the text embedding and tried to classify on that and try to come up with a decision whether it's spam or ham just based on that. So that's the reason we compared the 4 different architectures, which are all deep learning architectures. And now I'm going to go into what were the results. How did the 4 models performed? From here, we're comparing F1 scores. We haven't looked at accuracy because we know that the data set is imbalanced. We have a lot less spam examples rather than ham examples. So that's why evaluating just based on accuracy is not, wouldn't work in this case. That's why we're presenting only F1 scores. So F1 score would balance between precision and recall, and give us a more accurate evaluation. From here, we do see that BERT CNN and base BERT performed much better than our CNN LSTM, meaning that word-to-vec, the static embeddings, or this static way of converting text into a numeric representation doesn't work as well. BERT does have an advantage, and we see both BERT-based models reaching a much higher F1 score. One thing we are seeing here is that BERT models didn't perform as well on just the UCI data. And we're thinking that the expanded data set was actually remediating the imbalanced issue. That's why the F1 score on UCI is lower, because the data was a lot more imbalanced, and it either had a very high recall or very high precision. That's why F1 score didn't, it came out, when you try to balance between the two, it came out much lower. We also think that transformer-based models are less sensitive to imbalanced data in general. And yeah, one of the best performing ones is the BERT plus CNN. We also tested against different data sets. And what we also wanted to see here is the full data set, which is in blue, the one that we call plus PH. It should have performed better, but which we see. But then we also needed to make sure that PH translated, it's also in darker blue, has similar performance. And we see that across all 4 models, that they have very similar performance, meaning that our translation technique or our way of subsetting the data with more spam messages didn't introduce the bias. And the models didn't just make a classification decision on, oh, is this text message from the Philippines? But it seems like the decision should have been made based on other patterns and not just the patterns that we may have introduced by subsetting the data set with the new data. And I'll pass it on to Mitch to wrap up.
Thank you, Tanya. So we already know that rules-based SMS blocking failed, like what was done in like few months ago. So for one, scammers have easily gained the message structure. Another, the universal rule to block all messages with website links discriminates against valid messages and vendors. It dilutes the potential of SMS as an important communication medium and also a marketing medium. So the field of NLP is continuously advancing, especially the development of transformers or attention-based architectures in 2018. So we have demonstrated that existing NLP models, specifically neural networks, perform well in identifying spam. So despite the limited local specific training data. So if you have like better or industry data, this would further like improve the performance. But nevertheless, we still continue to receive spam SMS and we argue that this limited effort in addressing spam SMS is not of lack of available technology and methods, but because of weak incentives for networks to act on their own due to scale and profits, as discussed earlier. So regulation, therefore, has a crucial role in plugging this market failure and minimizing the need for enforcement, which could be costly. This includes the successful implementation of the SIM Registration Act, which was passed recently, and also encouraging industry collaboration to reduce the cost of model development, deployment, update, and maintenance. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch and Tanya. We remind everyone to fill in the attendance sheet that's available on the chat box. Also, if you have questions, so you don't forget, we'll have a Q&A towards the end of the session. So please type your questions in the chat box. So we move on to the presentation of Vince Yao. So Vince, are you able to upload? There you go. Okay, please proceed.
Hi everyone, good morning. So I'm Vince. In the audience with me is Paul Peña, although I think he's busy right now. So our research is entitled Digital for Her, Future Casting Platform Work for Women in Rural Philippines. Pao and I are from Angelo King Institute of De La Salle University. But this research would not have been possible if not for Philippine Institute for Development Studies. And particularly, we would like to thank Dr. Connie, Ms. Laura, and Ms. Lucita for helping us in this research. And also, we would like to acknowledge the external funding that we received from the International Development Research Center. So essentially, our research was inspired because of platform work. Platform work brought new opportunities to developing countries, and we were trying to evaluate how ready women in the countryside were for these new opportunities. The literature tells us that if the countryside, or if a country, or if a place is not ready to is not digitally ready, they would not really reap the benefits of these platform work. And so what we did is we took insights from a series of interviews and used a trend spotting and future casting approach to understand the frontier. And what we found was that there are fundamental barriers, mostly material access, skills access, digital access, which are the biggest issues that women face in the countryside. We also found that there is also a gender gap in platform work. So the platform work does not, in fact, remove gender gap, which we see or which we observe in non-digital work, non-platform work. And so what we recommend here is that what we conclude here is that there is still a great deal of bridging ICT access before any type of platform work becomes viable in the countryside. So we ask three main questions. So the first one is digital fundamentals and visions. So what we look at here is what is the vision of digital jobs in the Philippines? And what are the challenges experienced in the countryside, especially by women? The second question is about policy and public programs infrastructure. And what we ask here is what are key policy issues about digital jobs? And what do we need if the goal is to drive greater participation of women in platform jobs? And the third is the future casting of digital jobs in the Philippines. Because as we noted, as of now, digital jobs aren't the countryside isn't ready for digital jobs yet. So we look at best practices, trend setters in the frontier, and what key lessons and opportunities there are in the short run. So our conceptual framework is here. So what we look at are motivational access, material access, skills access, and usage access, and we see how key players or key stakeholders like the government and organizations can help in investing in human capital, strengthening social protection, and mobilizing revenue. So what we did was we evaluated whether the envisioned participants in the digital economy have the necessary access to digital technologies. And this created insights on what steps to take to maximize the potential of digital jobs in the countryside. And we made use of a more nuanced qualitative study that balances descriptive facts. And so what we do is we use trend spotting and future casting, which essentially is taking insights and experiences from those that we interviewed and work with this to harvest insights in developing a more future-oriented narrative. And essentially, from asking the research questions, what we find is that with regards to the digital vision and fundamentals, plans to expand the ICT labor market are underway. So there are several government programs already that try or have plans to invest in the infrastructure as well as the human capital for the ICT labor market. We also found that physical barriers and digital anxiety are the main reasons why there is a slow adoption in the countryside. So physical barriers include intermittent electricity. A lot of our interviewees actually complain about their electricity fluctuating. There's also the lack of internet access, as well as the physical computer access. So getting hold of access to the internet and especially digital jobs in the countryside is really difficult. There's also digital anxiety where people, especially women, have a difficult time approaching the concept of using a computer because they're anxious about it. There's also the cultural barriers that lead women to lower wage jobs. So there's still this stigma in some areas, in many areas in the countryside, that women are not fit for the more technical jobs. Sometimes this causes this causes women to fall into lower wage jobs. Also, we found that women, especially mothers, value the flexibility that freelancing provides. With regards to the policy infrastructure, we find that freelancers do not have social protection nor social recognition. But there is a bill that's about to be passed or has been passed. I'm not sure yet. Um, but this is really a big problem because you know there's no social protection for freelancers, which means they are a very vulnerable set of people. Um, the financially challenged also miss out on opportunities, as noted a while ago. Those in the countryside have difficulty acquiring computers, internet, so they have to invest in that, and without sufficient finances, they will miss out on the opportunities that digital jobs created. There is also a gender lens needed in policy, especially because we note that women, there are strong stigmas and stereotypes for women, especially in the countryside. We also saw that LGUs are key players in bridging the gap, a digital divide also. A lot of these programs, these initiatives to bridge the gap, or to improve the ICT infrastructure in the countryside are strongly reliant on LGUs, and the community members in the countryside also rely on the LGUs in um, these um, these programs. So, with regards to future casting platform jobs for women in the countryside, what we saw was that there were agencies, there were organizations that have been helping people get into digital jobs. And so what we found was that perhaps homegrown agencies will make access to platform jobs a lot easier. We also have women cooperatives that actually train people in the countryside, train people to become digital workers, platform workers. And so these women-focused cooperatives will bridge the skill acquisition and provide a support to bridge the gap. There are also cottage industries. There will also be cottage industries led by women and micro and small businesses that will connect to the global value chain via larger Filipino-owned marketplace platforms. So basically, more on exports. And we also have virtual marketplaces that will become more professionalized, making entry to the digital economy more accessible and better organized. So we go into the policy recommendations. So first, we have to reinvigorate the Philippines' whole society mandate to embrace digital transformation that is sensitive to the role that gender plays in development. So, as noted a while ago, there are already plans in the government to invest in less in areas outside Metro Manila to improve their ICTs. So, um, in line with this, there is also a need to identify and support which components, like it can't be just a one-dimensional thing. It has to be a whole package. So they have to identify. There's a need to identify a human capital development framework. Public and private infrastructure has to be there, and there has to be a labor market restructuring agenda. There's also a need to build confidence in digital technology because of digital anxiety, especially in those who were or who haven't been introduced to these technologies yet. So, one way to do this would be to provide basic public services through digital means, as well as mitigating learning curves and encourage the use of technology. Um, One other recommendation here would be to introduce the use of computers, the use of gadgets early on, maybe in childhood, maybe in elementary, so that these children would already be familiar with these technologies and hence not have that much of an anxiety. Um, and then we want fully implement. We want to fully implement the Free Internet Access in Public Areas Act, especially in the countryside where telco experiences vary. So users actually, or individuals who, even though they want to get into digital work, they want to get into platform work, they lack internet in some areas. So there is really a need for better coverage of internet, especially in the remote areas. There's also we also recommend strengthening the Tech for Ed program because it actually improves access and lowers the cost of participating in the digital economy. As noted by a lot of our interviewees, cost is a really large barrier also for them to get into digital jobs. And so Tech for Ed programs, the Tech for Ed program provides a spot, a place, or a hub for which these individuals can borrow or can use these spaces to work as platform or digital workers. So the problem is there were instances where even though there were Tech for Ed centers, these centers were really far away from the homes of these individuals. So what's important is actually making these Tech for Ed more accessible. So it could be possible to explore building smaller facilities at the barangay level rather than at the municipality level. Then there's also the consideration of equipping smaller these sites with electric generators because of the intermittent electricity that some areas actually experience. And then we want to explore diversifying public-private partnerships to address the gaps. We want to involve civil society organizations in facilitating a bottom-up approach in needs identification. So cooperatives and civil society organizations can actually provide the government with ground-level insights since they work directly with these individuals who want to be or to work or to train as platform workers. And then we also found that it would be possible for a partnership with state universities to penetrate areas with limited internet access. So basically, these universities can essentially double as hubs for which uh, trainings or work can happen. We also want to expand Digital Jobs PH and provide incentives to former graduates to form cooperatives, homegrown agencies, and other models of firm organizations. Because, as noted, more homegrown agencies will help bridge the access gap. Um, and so, and some preferential treatment could aid the sector's growth and expansion, especially in rural areas. So, homegrown agencies, they can bridge the gap by actually providing individuals or those who want to work as platform workers with the proper equipment for them to start their own careers in platform work. We also want to consider creating a commission of lifelong learning that would unite the efforts for the development of technical and soft and leadership skills needed to succeed in the digital economy. So one thing to note is that a lot of the trainers that we interviewed actually note the lack of soft skills, the confidence, the leadership skills in these individuals. So as much as possible, we want to develop those skills so that these individuals in the later part of their career could also create their own homegrown agencies. And so a chain would start there. We also want to provide graduates with courses and modules for self-improvement and personal leadership and leading through others. So a lot of individuals, those who want to, or those who graduate from courses that teach digital jobs or teach how to do digital jobs, they actually want to improve on themselves. So we find that it's an opportunity to provide graduates with even greater learning, further learning. We also want to create links that facilitate synergy among national government agencies involved in human capital. So far, what we found is that there's no really one unified plan between different sectors in addressing this digital gap. So there may, sorry, in lifelong learning also. So there may be, or there should be. It's better if there is a unified or a synergy among national government agencies. We also want to boost, support, and ramp up the expansion of Digital Jobs PH because this can aid in the digital transformation of micro, small, medium enterprises, LGUs, and domestic industries. We also want to create local demand for digital skills and serve as an incentive to participate in capacity building efforts. Because from what we found, um, sometimes even after an individual graduates from a training program, they have a difficult time looking for jobs. And after they graduate, what happens is they may migrate to another city, another municipality, and work there as a BPO employee, for example. And the reason for this is because local demand in a specific municipality where training happens isn't necessarily that high. So there may be training programs in municipality A, but no local demand for the skills that individuals train for. We also want to ratify and fully implement proposed laws seeking to recognize, protect, and boost public support for online freelancers. We want online freelancers to be entitled to night differential pay and hazard pay. And the DOLE, DTI, sorry, DTI, SSS, and BIR could also investigate how to define freelancing, online freelance work, and digital professionals to introduce an official classification for online workers. So one of the challenges actually in providing or in drafting policy for online freelancers is the lack of a definite classification or a definition as to what freelancing, online freelance work, and digital professionals are. Furthermore, we want these agencies, SSS, Pag-ibig, and DTI, to develop programs based on a standardized definition of online freelancing. Um, there is also a need to be more deliberate in efforts to enroll women in social protection schemes as they venture into platform jobs. So a lot of them are actually, I guess, they have a difficult time. Actually, yeah, our interviewees report having a difficult time enrolling for social protection schemes, also because of the lack of a proper definition as to what freelancers are or platform workers are. We want there to be a review on policies on competitive pricing for contracting work in the Philippines and balancing national interests in boosting comparative advantage in the IT BPM with those of personal income generation. And because we saw that the graduates of these training programs, they tend to, especially in the general virtual assistants profession, there seems to be a race to the bottom competition in freelance work or online freelance work. So we want to avoid that. There is also a need to consider compensating for mothers working from home with non-price benefits, which would help mitigate the conflicting responsibilities of mothers, as well as there is also a need to maybe a suggestion would be to partner with civil society organizations and legislating in favor of non-price benefits for women working at home, because a lot of mothers actually or women share their experiences of having a difficult time balancing their time. Also consider building an online marketplace for digital services, because a matching platform made to promote and consolidate access to Filipino talents can actually reduce frictions and barriers. And the local platform designed to promote Filipino talents also provides greater uniformity in terms of pricing, so less of a race to the bottom. Um, and then we also want to reinvigorate the role of PCW in ensuring that government programs have particular attention to the training and development and empowerment of women in the countryside. So we want to ensure that the future growth of the IT BPM outside Metro Manila will give women leadership and managerial positions in online freelancing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vince. So we will ask the questions later. So if you have for the participants, if you have questions, again, please type them in the chat box. So we move on to Gabby. Hey, Gabby. We can't hear you.
Hi, good morning. Let me share my screen. And let me do a full screen. Hi, good morning. My name is Gabriel Domingo. This is work with Dash Cordero. We both work at the Philippine Competition Commission, but this is not Philippine Competition Commission part of our jobs in the Philippine Competition Commission or official research coming from the Philippine Competition Commission. Right now, the results that I will be showing you are preliminary, and I look forward to any comments and suggestions after the presentation. All right. How do I? There you go. Okay, so here's the background of the study. So agriculture is important socially and economically here in the Philippines and in the broader developing country context. We know this in terms of employment, especially in the rural areas. Agriculture is a very important source of livelihood in the Philippines. And recently, there has been a lot of interest in agricultural efficiencies in the Philippines, and particularly its role perhaps in exacerbating food inflation in the Philippines. Let me discuss briefly market power. So market power is an example of inefficiencies or inefficient wedges that limit market outcomes and perhaps exacerbate inflation and market adjustment. There has been much interest in this topic in agricultural economics and in broader macroeconomic contexts. Speaking as a consultant at the PCC, the Philippine Competition Commission, as a competition agency, the Philippine Competition Commission are interested in investigating market power, and market power is an essential component, an ingredient in advocacy and in pursuing enforcement action. In the economics literature, there has been a growth in research in market power estimation using various methods, which I will sort of outline in a moment. And there's been much interest also in the popular literature in the role of market power in society and how market power has grown over the years. So this is a preliminary paper, and our goal is ultimately to estimate market power in Philippine agricultural markets. This is part of my research program in examining market power, broadly speaking, in various Philippine markets using long-running establishment datasets. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some literature. Okay, so just to set the scene. There's been a lot of research in these inefficient wedges and market power in developing country contexts. Unfortunately, the interpretation of this research is a little bit mixed. So here we have a listing of some of the survey articles for market power and inefficiencies in Africa and the United States. And in particular for developing country contexts in Africa and different countries in Africa, there's quite an interest in the efficiency of agricultural value chains and how market power can somehow interfere in the efficiency of these agricultural value chains. So what are the results of, broadly speaking, of this research in market power in agricultural markets? The results are basically, it's mixed, right? They indicate that market power in certain pockets may exist given sufficient conditions, meaning what are these sufficient conditions? These are transport costs, information frictions, and so on. All of those things can create conditions in which market power can thrive and exist. Typically, we would believe that if market power should be a transitory, assuming free entry and low fixed costs and low barriers to entry, that market power is essentially transitory. And they find that in certain pockets of agricultural markets, it's possible that such market power can persist. On the other hand, they also find in many instances that agricultural markets are competitive. And in all of this work, they use, well, I'll talk a little bit about what kind of work is done in these other countries. But generally, they use survey data and administrative price data, and as well as establishment survey data that we use here. Also, broadly speaking, there's an increasing focus on the role of supply chains in either easing or aggravating the existing inefficiencies in agricultural markets. So research in specific country contexts, specific market contexts have uncovered inefficiencies that hint at market power or might even directly measure it. So some of the most popular methods are price integration, in which we infer market power through a lack of price integration. So in other countries, you would have, so in Mozambique, for example, Moser, Barrett, and Minton, Allen, using broadly trade data in the Philippines, Porteous in sub-Saharan Africa. They would use different techniques to indicate whether there is price integration or whether there are actual trade costs that prevent prices to be integrated across geographical regions. Generally speaking, there has been less research on this, but this is quite promising. It is pass-through, and this directly talks to or speaks to the role of value chains and how efficient the value chains are. And in particular, the pass-through of costs to final prices across how price shocks travel across the value chain. There's not been a lot of work on this yet because value chain research can be quite difficult to do. An example of this would be Atkin and Donaldson using very detailed price data. Another would be structural interpretation of reduced form models. So in other words, you would have a model of demand and supply, for example, and come up with a reduced form model and interpret, run regressions on reduced form models that sort of talk about either trade costs, information frictions, or even possibly conduct parameters, which conduct parameters are these parameters that discuss or outline or summarize the kind of competition that is available in a market, that's happening in the market. Excuse me. So examples of this would be Kopp and Sexton, where they have data on rubber processors in Indonesia, and in Dingra and a few others, okay? And they find evidence of market power directly through the reduced form interpretation of a structural model. And finally, somewhat more rarely, excuse me for the typo here. So we have a couple of more recent models that use demand-side structural estimation to directly estimate those conduct parameters that I was talking about. So Zavala was talking about access to global markets, global agricultural markets, and how access to these global agricultural sellers, they have buyer power, and they're able to lower the price at which they're able to buy these agricultural crop products. Rubens, the second one, which did not render properly, is actually a paper on Chinese tobacco farmers and how these large tobacco mills are able to lower the price, the buying price, because of this buyer power that they're able to estimate. These sorts of papers require data on at least the purchasing side if you're interested in buyer power and detailed purchasing data from specific buyers and specific sellers. Now I would like to, so all of this stuff is interesting, and we'd like to estimate market power instead using what's called the production function approach. Okay, so most of the applications of this production function approach use manufacturing, but in principle can be used for any industry. So what is this production function approach? Let me talk about that in a moment. So first, let me now go to work in the Philippines. I've tried to do some extensive literature review in the Philippines. So other than this, there's of course the Allen paper that I mentioned a while ago on regional price integration. This is some work that I have read that has been done in rice markets generally. So much work on inefficiencies and perhaps market power, or the inference of market power, has been done in rice using asymmetric price adjustment or co-integration methods by Silva Pool and Jayasuriya, Reader, Intal, and Briones. Some work on the direct measurement of market power. So instead of just inferring the existence of market power through price adjustment or the lack of price adjustment, there has been some work directly on actually trying to measure it, such as the work by Medalla et al. With their PCC manufacturing scoping paper, which is available online, and some work by Abranica and other work by Aldaba outside of agriculture. So Abranica does this for electricity, and Aldaba does this for cement. Increasingly, there's been important work in value chains in specific markets, and this is a good way to move forward with market power work, actually. So there's some work in rice from Phil Rice, from Mataya et al., using measuring, looking at studying the value chain of rice specifically. So now let me discuss the production function method as an alternative to estimating a supply and demand oligopoly model. So typically if you were exposed to this kind of, to market power concepts in school or in university, you might be aware that you would want to have a supply and demand, and at the same time a model of competition, so an oligopoly model, and that these elements or ingredients can be used all together to sort of estimate at the market level the kind of competition that is occurring in that market. So that is certainly possible, and we've described in earlier slides how that has been done. Either directly estimating structurally this model, or coming up with a reduced form interpretation of such a supply and demand oligopoly model. So an alternative to this would be one popular and theory consistent approach to estimating markup wedges is the production function approach. This is started by Hall way back in 1988 for the United States, and has since been expanded in multiple applications. So the paper has some citations of what kind of applications these are. Broadly speaking, we can say that they've been this has been applied to at the industry level, usually for manufacturing, and most recently can be used at the firm level. It has also been used to look at markups and inefficient wedges in services. The most notable extensions recently are work by DeLoker, Unger, and Eckhout in a series of paper that use this method at the firm level, combine it with advances in production function estimation at the firm level to estimate markups. Okay, so in these series of papers, in which I just call out this DeLoker, Eckhout, and Unger 2020, which is the macroeconomic implications of increase of markups. They find in the United States, for example, that markups have been growing over time, and because from this production function approach. Okay, so like I said, applications have been mainly for manufacturing and services. However, there has been some work on agricultural manufacturing using agricultural manufacturing data by Lopez and Azam, using an extension of the basic Hall approach using a stochastic frontier method, which is essentially still a production function method. Related to the Philippines, so DeLoker and Eckhout in a working paper called Global Market Power was able to calculate a markup series for many countries, including the Philippines, using publicly listed companies and publicly available financial data. All right. So here's the model, which can explain perhaps what sort of data is required. So like we said, like DeLoker et al. Requires data on establishment finances or firm finances. They would need data on outputs, costs, and inputs. This is because the model itself is essentially a production function estimation problem. So it is an extension of the Solo model, and that Solo model basically relaxes perfect competition. So under perfect competition, changes in outputs and the various inputs will look like the left-hand side, and the residual would be called TFP, or total factor productivity. So equation 1 here is the typical Solo model under perfect competition. Now, once you relax perfect competition and allow for imperfect competition, what we would note is that the elasticity of output with respect to some input X is epsilon Q with respect to X, it should be X, is equal to alpha, which is the share of the input, okay, times mu, which is a markup term. So instead of it being just equal to the share in output, it's now a share times a markup term. So given two inputs, K and N, capital and labor, and the log growth terms are the change in the small letter X, we can rewrite equation 1 into equation 2, wherein you'd have this markup term to be included in a typical production function estimation. So an important consideration in this approach to uncover a true markup is it can be estimated if that input that we are discussing is flexibly determined at the firm level in the time period where the data is taken. In the specification over 1 year, we assume that labor and materials are flexibly determined. So this framework also allows us to determine economies of scale given the inputs included. So we use the fact that the sum of the elasticities of output with respect to the inputs is equal to lambda, and lambda is the scale parameter. And if lambda is 1, the production function exhibits constant returns to scale. So in words, if all of the inputs go up by 1%, then output will go up by 1%. That means lambda is equal to 1. All right. So we estimate, given the two bullets above, we form the regression model of the form below. So what we would like to do first is sort of take out capital, because we believe that capital has less of this it's not as flexibly determined as inputs or labor. And then that's why you would take out capital on the left hand and the right hand side, and you would end up having mu as a coefficient to be determined in the regression model. Likewise, by subtracting k, we are able to isolate economies of scale in the same model, where lambda equal -1 is the coefficient, and if the coefficient happens to be almost or close to 0, then that would be evidence for constant returns to scale. All right, so what data do we use? Like we said, we need establishment level data on outputs and costs and inputs. And what we would use is we will use a 2012 to 2018 Module A from the CP, or let me read this out, Census of Philippine Business and Industry, and Annual Survey of Philippine Business and Industry. There should be a Philippines there. It contains producers and service providers of agricultural products, crops, livestock, fish, and lumber and timber. Sampling is confined to formal industry, and an establishment is defined as an economic unit which engages in predominantly one kind of economic activity at a fixed physical location. So this is all part of the documentation of the CPBI and the ASPBI. So not included in Module A are wholesalers, retailers, and manufacturers, which includes milling. These are in other modules. So these are currently not yet part of the data set, even though these ones, so we were talking about the value chain earlier. These players in the other parts of the value chain are not included in this data set so far. So we're sort of trying to isolate ourselves to producers and producers of agricultural products, crops, livestock, and fish in Module A. So talking a little bit more about the data, sampling frame for this establishment surveys come from a list of establishments prepared by the PSA. The CPBI takes a sampling frame, all formal establishments in the list of establishments. Now, formal establishments with total employment of 20 or more are selected with 100% certainty. This is something that we confirm, and that's something we use a little later, as you'll see. While smaller establishments are sampled randomly. There's no 2011 survey, so that's why we go until 2012. Other than that, we could have taken a few years earlier from 2010. However, we noted that there's a break in the questionnaire between 2010 and 2012. So post 2012, or 2012 and after, I should say, allows us to divide costs into cost of goods sold and general administrative expenditure. So this will be an important factor, so we keep only 2012 onwards and focus on these two types of input expenditure. And we look at, again, this is a question of the flexibility in setting the input levels. So for example, DeLocher et al., they had used the cost of goods sold as the flexible input. And in following their example, we do the same. So we have two types of shares, total input cost as a share in total income, which includes general administrative expenditure, and shares based on COGS as a share of sales, which perhaps could be more flexible and would allow us to uncover a better better markup estimate. So these are the two sort of variants of the regression that we will be seeing here. Share of total income, from which inputs are taken from the sum of cost of goods sold and GAE, and shares based on COGS alone, based on a share of sales. So what we do in the regression is we come up with, or we aggregate up to the PSIC-5, which is the highest, most disaggregated level at the PSIC level, right? So this is our unit of observation in the regression. So we look at different establishments at the PSIC 5 and we get the weighted average per PSIC 5 available in module A. Now, for the regressions, we remove the top and bottom 1% of the Y and X values. So the Y values will be the change in output. So these are all changes, by the way, log changes already. The changes in output minus the change in capital stock. And the X will be those weighted, share-weighted sums or share-weighted changes in inputs. And our inputs are labor and materials. So you have labor here, and we have materials here. And those are our flexible inputs. So first, let me discuss the revenue side. So if you examine the data from 2012 to 2018, you'll see this sort of revenue structure. What we would like to do, what we did in the analysis is to if you look at agricultural services here, these are the share of income from which you get from agricultural services. We would like to focus on establishments that focus on sales, on selling products, producing products, and selling products. So basically, we examine only establishments that fit criteria, and this criteria is that the income from sales is sufficiently high. So we sort of do not examine agricultural services. Although we have some preliminary evidence that agricultural services are in fact have lower markups, but that is not part of the results I have right now. Okay. All right, so this is our preliminary regression, taking all of the PSIC 5 averages, like we just discussed, and then looking only at establishments that mainly sell products, produce and sell products. This is our X variables here, as we discussed. And these coefficients here are basically the markup estimates that come from the results, that come from the model. So a mu that is higher, significantly higher than 1, statistically and significantly higher than 1, is evidence for markups. And here the markups would be 27% and 25%. And these are the scale coefficients. And here, if they're indistinguishable from 0, then that is evidence for constant returns to scale. Okay, so these are for all of the establishments, and these are the average. These are the baseline results. So now we're wondering, okay, maybe there could be some markups here, right, in agricultural producers in the Philippines. Okay. Further, we disaggregate some results. So we look at establishments that are there for 6 or 7 years versus those with less than 6 years. So we mentioned before that these ones were always sampled. These ones are the really big ones, and the ones that are not always sampled are not as large. And we confirm in the data that this is true. So these are weighted averages for average income and costs for these 2 different types of agricultural producers. And we find generally that the gap in size here is almost a factor of 10 to 1. So firms that have been sampled consistently over the period 2012 to 2018 are simply that much larger than firms that are infrequently or randomly sampled. Okay. So we were kind of worrying about that, right? And that's why we decided to do a disaggregated regression. On the left-hand side, you will see that these are the large firms essentially that we've isolated. And we found that the markup terms are indistinguishable from 1 for these firms on the left-hand side, while the ones that are really contributing to that markup are the ones that are smaller, 1.4 and 1.4 for the sales revenue share and the sales share. All right. Oh, another thing that I'd like to point out is that because we're using sales share here as a measure of more flexible adjustment, similar to the Deloker and all, their coefficients using the sales share are larger here than using the revenue share. And in other regressions that I have done, it's part of the paper that I have not presented here, if you were to use the cost share, these sales share coefficients are in fact also larger than if you were to use a cost share as opposed to a revenue share or the sales share of inputs. All right. So let's interpret. So large firms tend to have very small markups, and smaller firms tend to have larger markups. So from the Loker, Eckhout, and Unger, we have that an aggregate markup here is simply the weighted sum of the individual establishment markups weighted by the revenue share. So we cannot do that exactly here because we have PSIC 5 averages, but based on the relationship between the two samples, the aggregate markup is much, much closer to that of 6 years or more. So we conclude here that in general, for Philippine agricultural markets, the markup is quite small because of that, right? Now, smaller agricultural producers can be seen to have these larger wedges. Okay, these wedges could be markups based on market power. It could be a possible source of inefficiencies that they face, such as risks and other forms of transportation or knowledge or information fictions. Moving forward, so this is a preliminary paper. We are not yet complete with our analysis. We would like to include other agricultural related enterprises, manufacturing and wholesalers, and sort of have that complete sense of the value chain in agriculture using this method. We would also like to see the relationship between our estimates and profits, which we can compute because we have income and costs and both GAE and COGS, cost of goods sold, and the estimates that we have here at the PSIC 5 level. So these two are related, but they're mediated by the economies of scale coefficient that we have also estimated. All right, so that's my presentation, and I look forward to reading these chat comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabby. So we can now entertain questions. We have a few in the chat box, but those who'd like to speak up, please raise your hand and then before you ask your question. So are there any questions from, yes, Alex, go ahead. Alex, you may ask your question. Alex, are you there? If otherwise, we can entertain other questions from some participants.
Hello, sorry, I was on mute.
Okay, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. Apologies in advance to Vince. I've been involved in IT for the last 25 years. And I'm getting the impression that he's not appreciating fully the concept of being digital. My understanding of being digital in the platform sense that he was presenting was that you have an example like freelance.com, where it is a global platform. In fact, I met a tenant in in our condo, a Pakistani descent British born who just decided to go to the Philippines, and via freelance.com, he was able to find a job as an IT support. Meaning a digital platform is a digital platform that is global. So that statement sorts of contradicts the direction of his analysis, which goes down to localizing it down to the barangay level. because the idea in digital is you provide the infrastructure, enable, so it enables anybody from anywhere to work for anybody. So therefore, that's my first comment. That sort of undermines the whole paper. Number two, uh, I did not see any scoping in terms of the market size, the number of practitioners, uh, what is the size of the population that is affected or onboarding on this freelance.com platform. So in the interest of time, I would offer to do a one-on-one session with Vince to sort of helping get his paper straight. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Pao or Vince, would you like to reply?
Yes, thank you, Sir Alex. Actually, we agree that platform work actually allows individuals to work for anyone, even across globally. And we did interview a lot of freelance workers who actually worked for from the Western countries. They work night shifts. Um, However, one concern, our study kasi focuses on the countryside, and what we saw was that there are physical barriers. Yes, there are a lot of people who work as freelancers for international clients, but in the countryside, there is a larger portion that don't have access to equipment to actually even start working as platform workers. Um, and also regarding yung market size and population of freelance workers naman, what we did was a qualitative study. And we also, of course, checked the literature, and it's unanimous that platform workers, freelance workers, digital workers, they're really hard to capture statistically because actually a lot of them don't want to be discovered. Paano ba? Some are afraid of the government, baka matak sila, ganun. Um, Other times, we actually reached out to a lot of people for them to get interviewed, mga online sellers, um, platform workers, mga service types. But unfortunately, maraming tumanggi sa amin. So that's another problem in capturing
Mhm.
yung population.
Well, that problem is not fatal, but precisely because of data limitation, uh, your conclusions and recommendations are far outreaches the amount of your data and your conclusions. Uh, for example, the proper intervention would be to make available at the lowest cost price these digital bandwidths. For example, the Starlink satellite-based technology of Elon Musk, which is already starting to roll out here, is supposed to be, because we cannot wait for government to do that. They have no way of being able to roll that out to the rural areas. I know I know Elon Musk partner here in the Philippines, and he's very bullish about being able to offer it even to the remotest islands. I think that's step one. The key is just to make it available and make it as a platform that empowers people. Uh, and I would really stop there, because when you say, we need social protection for these people, they don't even want to be covered, and if they declare themselves, they will be taxed, as you said, di ba? So if you do not want to be taxed, what gives you the right to be protected?
Sir,
Di ba?
actually,
So
there
those
is
are,
this. Yeah,
I think,
sorry.
basic
Go ahead, pa.
questions. Yes, please.
Yes, sir.
Please go
Actually,
ahead.
from what we found out kasi, yung mga platform workers that have not went through training, for example, of Digital Jobs PH, or are unaware of the benefits. A lot of them are unaware of the benefits of being taxed, of being covered by social protection. And so one of the problems talaga is educating them, or making them more informed of what risks they are actually taking, or what protection they actually receive if they start contributing to things like SSS, pag-ibig, insurance, and things like that. But yes sir, thank you. Very noted po doon sa ano, yun pong access po on digital bandwidths.
Okay, thank
And
you
I
for that.
think you have to stratify it across last suggestion. You might need to stratify it across different capabilities. For example, I'm 66. I'm not a digital. I'm a digital. So you are a digital native, diba? So the digital natives and the Gen Zers know these things second nature to them. So I think the kind of intervention would be different from those who are just learning it from scratch, as opposed to those because you know, you go to the provinces, even the smallest kids know how to use a phone and are becoming digital natives themselves. Anyway,
Agreed po doon sir, agreed.
I can be available to sort of be your advisor to further this research, because sayang to, this is a promising piece.
Sir Alex, I think Sir Pao also replies to you in chat.
No, I'm sorry, I'm driving kasi, so I cannot. Could you read it for me?
Okay. He is replying, yes, that's right. Anyone can jump in a global labor market. What we're saying is that freelancers from the countryside cannot even have the proper access to the opportunities, with fundamental access and cultural barriers, especially for women. Bringing it down to a barangay level is more making facilities more accessible to platform workers from the countryside, who usually find themselves traveling far to carry out their freelancing jobs if they find one. And then, is there anything you'd like to say po for that?
Yes, agree. But it has to do with putting out the bandwidth over there. A classic case lang, di ba, itong nung pandemic, and the people are the students are forced to go online. So the ones that are worst affected are the people in the provinces, because they don't even have tablets. And they cannot
Yes, sir.
even see their lessons properly on their phones with very poor signal, di ba? So I think just addressing that number one infrastructure gap will take care of a lot of these issues that you're talking about.
Yes, sir. That's actually also part of the
Okay, uh,
one of our recommendations. Thank you,
all
sir.
right. So thank you for that exchange. So let's consider a comment from James for Mitch and Tanya. Mitch or Tanya, would you like to comment on this, the applicability of your models to spam comments on Facebook and other uh,
Yes, certainly. I'll be
yeah.
happy to comment. So the the big part of our research was also understanding that the aftermath spam, or even examples of what are not widely available. It's not like a huge data set that you could obtain. And that's one of the reasons why this is still a harder problem to solve. We just need more data. And to the point of comments, and we could use the same architecture that we proposed to also apply this to weed out the spam comments from social networks or other platforms. But the bigger problem is that has to be taken care of by the social network or by the commercial partner who's holding the data. And right now, we don't have access to that data, for example. The other thing to consider is, while the architecture we propose work well on SMS spam detection, they may not be the best for social media. There might be some difference and some different patterns between SMS spam and social media, especially comment spam. So we may use the same architectures, but we may want to retrain all of the models in order for them to perform well on the comment purging task, because that task may be fundamentally different, but those are the things that we may have to experiment with.
Yeah. Maybe just to add, what's good thing about the BERT architecture? Is that it is a pre-trained model, so you don't actually need lots and like millions of data points, but not 300 like what we have, like thousands of that's what we have. But if you have like more data, it's better. But the BERT model can actually run on smaller data sets, not in millions, because it's a pre-trained model.
All right. In your abstract, you did mention the need to incentivize industry collaboration. Do you have any specific, incentives that you think we could advocate for?
One is shame game. That's disincentive. Like this was mentioned by Sir Babes earlier in one of our like private discussions, that you could like maybe post or publish metrics that tells how well telecoms actually block or address the issue. Like for example, metrics like spam over spam block over total spam, or spam over non-spam, something. Okay, so that's publication. And one is via some regulatory or policy policy. I haven't thought much about what policy can be done, but yeah.
All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Bing.
Thank you. I have a question for Gabby. Of course, Gabby, I am very invested in your research because it's something that we will use at the Philippine Competition Commission. Uh, yeah, Gabby, are you there? Yeah.
Yes, I'm here. Yes, go ahead.
You did mention that in your work with Dash, you used sampling that is confined to the formal industry, given the data set that you have. But what if somebody says, okay, so you have this model, but then a large fraction of the informal sector in the agriculture is not captured. So how do we justify the usefulness then of the model?
Yes, so I think the message of the results so far is that so the idea here is of the paper is to get sort of an aggregate at this point in time, no, a national level markup figure. And so far as these large firms are in fact so much larger than the informal firms or even the small formal firms, that these markups are basically at the national level basically are equal to zero, because the most of the output is generated by these large formal firms. The interesting research question to be followed up on here is it's most likely that these informal firms have a similar market experience to that of the smaller formal firms. And I think we have really powerful evidence here that they in fact have these inefficiencies, even at the small formal firms, and that these are also, even though we did not measure them directly in this data set, these similar markups and inefficiencies are also available for those smaller firms. And this is the kind of research we should do moving forward, is to find out what exactly the sources of these inefficiencies or the markup wedges are. So this is a kind of Bing would know, this is sort of like a landscaping sort of paper that we want to identify what problems we really should focus on. And what we're saying is that these smaller firms are the ones that are experiencing these larger inefficiencies, and therefore, as the agency, we should focus our research on them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gabby. So thank you, everyone. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Before we let you go, please fill in. We remind you to fill in the attendance sheet just to document this session. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bing. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Vince. Thanks, Mitch.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hi,
Bye.
Gabby. Hi, Bing.
Bye-bye. Thank you.